A spectre haunts America. It is the spectre of Donald Trump's return to power in 2025. This time he would not be an untested outsider. He would be backed by a meticulously crafted blueprint for reshaping America. This blueprint is known as Project 2025. It's a product of the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank. Project 2025 lays out a radical agenda. It seeks to dismantle the administrative state and remake it in Trump's image. Project 2025 is not merely a policy document. It is a declaration of war on the institutions of American democracy. Its authors understand that Trump's first term was hampered by his lack of control over the federal bureaucracy. They aim to ensure that a second Trump term faces no such obstacles. They envision a government purged of expertise and independent thought, replaced by loyalists who will implement Trump's will without question. The implications for American democracy are chilling. Project 2025 envisions a wholesale assault on the rule of law, the separation of powers, and the very notion of a government accountable to the people. It is a recipe for authoritarianism, pure and simple. And it is a stark reminder that the fight for the soul of America is far from over. The stakes could not be higher. The future of American democracy, and indeed the future of the planet, may well hinge on whether Project 2025 is implemented. We must understand the threat it poses and mobilize to resist it with everything we have. The time for complacency is long past. The time for action is now. Project 2025 represents a comprehensive assault on the very foundations of American governance. Its architects, fueled by a deep-seated disdain for the role of government, envision a radical restructuring of the federal bureaucracy. Their goal is not simply to shrink the size of government, but to fundamentally alter its nature, transforming it into a tool for advancing a narrow partisan agenda. Central to Project 2025 is the concept of Schedule F, a little-known executive order issued by Trump in his waning days in office. This order allows for the reclassification of tens of thousands of career civil servants, stripping them of their job protections and making them vulnerable to political pressure and outright dismissal. The intention is clear: to replace experienced professionals with partisan loyalists who will toe the line and implement Trump's agenda without question. This attack on the civil service is nothing short of an assault on the very notion of a professional, non-partisan government. It is a recipe for cronyism, corruption, and incompetence. By undermining the expertise and independence of the civil service, Project 2025 would cripple the government's ability to function effectively and serve the needs of the American people. The consequences for democracy are dire. A government staffed by political appointees beholden to a single individual is not a democracy, it is an autocracy. By dismantling the guardrails of accountability and transparency, Project 2025 paves the way for unchecked executive power and the erosion of democratic norms. Nowhere is the potential impact of Project 2025 more alarming than in the realm of environmental policy. The blueprint lays out a comprehensive plan to dismantle existing environmental regulations, unleash the fossil fuel industry, and silence the voices of science and reason in policymaking. The consequences for the planet could be catastrophic. Central to this agenda is the rollback of regulations on greenhouse gas emissions. The Trump administration already made significant strides in this direction during its first term, but Project 2025 goes much further, calling for the complete dismantling of the Environmental Protection Agency's authority to regulate carbon emissions. This would be a death knell for any hope of the United States meeting its commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement, and would have devastating consequences for the planet. Beyond climate change, Project 2025 targets a wide range of environmental protections. From clean air and water regulations to protections for endangered species, the blueprint seeks to gut decades of progress in safeguarding our environment. The result would be a dramatic increase in pollution, habitat destruction, and the loss of biodiversity. The human cost of this environmental carnage would be immense. Millions of people, particularly in marginalized communities, would face increased exposure to toxic pollutants, leading to higher rates of respiratory illnesses, cancer, and other health problems. The very air we breathe and the water we drink would be at risk. A world adrift American retreat and the global climate catastrophe. The environmental implications of Project 2025 extend far beyond America's borders. As the world's second-largest emitter of greenhouse gases, the United States plays a critical role in global efforts to combat climate change. The implementation of Project 2025 would signal a complete abdication of that responsibility, with potentially catastrophic consequences for the entire planet. The Paris Climate Agreement, a landmark international agreement aimed at limiting global warming, relies heavily on the participation of all major emitters, particularly the United States. The Trump administration's withdrawal from the agreement dealt a significant blow to the accord, but the Biden administration's return offered a glimmer of hope. However, the implementation of Project 2025 would effectively slam the door shut on any meaningful US action on climate change, leaving the rest of the world to grapple with the consequences of America's inaction. The global response to such a move would be swift and severe. The United States would face international condemnation, economic sanctions, and diplomatic isolation. More importantly, the loss of American leadership would severely undermine global efforts to address the climate crisis, leaving the world on a dangerous trajectory toward catastrophic warming. The consequences of inaction are already being felt around the world, from more frequent and intense heat waves and droughts to rising sea levels and more destructive storms. The implementation of Project 2025 would accelerate these trends, leading to widespread displacement, food shortages, and political instability. The human cost of climate change is already staggering, but it would pale in comparison to the suffering that would result from America's abdication of its global responsibility. Social upheaval targeting immigrants, LGBTQ+ rights, and women. Project 2025's assault on social justice is as comprehensive as its attack on environmental regulations. It targets the most vulnerable members of society, aiming to roll back decades of progress on civil rights and social justice. Immigrants, LGBTQ+ individuals, and women are particularly in the crosshairs of this regressive agenda. The blueprint calls for a dramatic escalation of the Trump administration's already draconian immigration policies. It envisions a future where borders are further militarized, families are torn apart, and asylum seekers are turned away en masse. The cruel and inhumane treatment of migrants would become not the exception but the rule. LGBTQ+ rights, hard-won through decades of struggle and sacrifice, are also under threat. Project 2025 seeks to reverse gains made in areas like marriage equality, adoption rights, and protection from discrimination. It envisions a return to a time when LGBTQ+ individuals were forced to live in the shadows, denied basic rights and dignity. Women's rights are similarly under attack. Project 2025 seeks to restrict access to reproductive health care, including abortion, and to limit women's economic opportunities. It promotes a vision of society where women are relegated to traditional roles, their voices silenced and their autonomy curtailed. The implementation of these policies would have a devastating impact on millions of Americans, creating a climate of fear and division. It would be a betrayal of the American promise of equality and justice for all. Economic disparity, tax cuts, deregulation, and the erosion of social safety nets. Project 2025's economic agenda mirrors the Trump administration's policies, promising massive tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy while gutting social safety net programs. This trickle-down approach to economics has been repeatedly debunked, yet it remains a cornerstone of the conservative agenda. The blueprint calls for deep cuts to taxes on corporations and high earners, arguing that these cuts will stimulate economic growth and benefit all Americans. However, experience has shown that such tax cuts primarily benefit the wealthy, exacerbating income inequality and doing little to boost overall economic growth. While showering the wealthy with tax breaks, Project 2025 proposes slashing funding for essential social safety net programs, including Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. These programs provide a lifeline for millions of Americans, including seniors, people with disabilities, and low-income families. Cutting them would push millions further into poverty and exacerbate the already widening gap between the rich and the poor. The deregulation agenda outlined in Project 2025 would have far-reaching consequences for workers, consumers, and the environment. The blueprint calls for rolling back regulations on Wall Street, weakening protections for consumers, and dismantling environmental safeguards. These measures would enrich corporations and the wealthy at the expense of ordinary Americans, who would face greater economic insecurity, higher healthcare costs, and a more polluted environment.